Hello friends, today we have with us Akshay Marathe, and he is Aam Aadmi Party volunteer who works on the ground in Delhi. So the purpose of today's call is to discuss the school tuition fee refund which Delhi government is fighting the private schools in there. And recently in the last month, around May 20, 575 private schools asked to refund tuition fee, excess tuition fee with 9% interest.
Hi Aditya, glad to be on your YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Uh, I am an Aam Aadmi Party volunteer, like you mentioned. I have been working with Atishi, who was until very recently advising Manish Sisodia ji on education
Yeah.
in Delhi.
Mhm.
I was working with her and the entire education team for the last 2 years. Uh, so I have seen very closely how the Delhi government formulates education policy and how it implements that policy also. That has been my core volunteering role in the last 2 years. I also work with the party on with the media cell on organization building, but a major part of my time is spent on education, and that's what I've been.
Yeah. So in the recent decision came from High Court that 575 private school has to refund the excess fee. And what was the excess fee for which academic year this excess fee was?
I believe the one that has just been announced was from 2013 and 14,
Hmm.
but I might be mistaken by a year or so.
Yeah.
But it was a couple of years ago. From that year, this is being talked about.
Yeah. So when I tracked the timeline for this case, and I found on Aam Aadmi Party page that this was also their agenda item. So can you tell what was the origin agenda and where this idea got adopted by Aam Aadmi Party?
Sure. See, anyone who has lived in Delhi or in any of the major cities of India, every one of us has seen the kind of rapid commercialization of education that has happened in the last 2 decades or so. I went to a private school in Mumbai, and my parents were paying really high fees year after year, and they kept on increasing without any explanation, without any justification. So the same thing has been happening in Delhi as well. And Aam Aadmi Party, when we were contesting for 2015 election, we had a clear idea in mind that the reason that private schools are able to do that is because there is a very strong politician, bureaucrat, and private school nexus. So the same politician who is supposed to be running government schools is actually also running private schools on the side, and which is why it's always in the politician's interest to kind of allow government schools to deteriorate or neglect government schools so that children move from government schools to private schools. Now, while this sounds like a generalization, people will be really amazed to see the number of politicians in Delhi who own private schools. And the other reason that this is possible is because in Delhi, for the last few decades, all land has been allotted and planned by the Delhi Development Authority,
Hmm.
which has been under the central government right since independence. I mean, right since the DDA was formed. So whenever a politician wants to open a school, the DDA will allot land to that politician at throwaway prices, which is where the collusion begins, and then the collusion goes on because governments don't want to regulate uh, school fees run by, I mean, in schools run by those politicians. So this was the core philosophy because of which AAP actually even spoke about private school fee regulation, because everyone knew this was happening, and if an honest party was elected to power, then it was likely that this would be stopped, and that's what was on our manifesto also. Now, how did we do that? Is the second part. Uh, there is a long history. There is a long legislative history. There is a long judicial history to this entire issue. I won't go into the nitty gritty of it all because it's very complex, and it does not serve any purpose as such. But basically, what we have to understand is that there are two things that govern Delhi schools. One is the Delhi School Education Act, which was passed by the Parliament in 1973.
Hmm.
The second is the Delhi Development Authority's school allotment agreements. So whenever the DDA allotted any land to private schools, they would have a lease agreement, and that agreement would have a certain set of guidelines which had a regulatory authority over those schools. So one, you had the law, which is the DSEAR, then you had the DDA's lease agreements.
Yeah.
Both of these instruments in the hands of an honest government are in today's times powerful enough to regulate private school fees. The problem was that, like I mentioned earlier, that the government was not willing to use those tools. The government was empowered to crack down on private schools even before AAP came into power. But because of this strong nexus, no one was actually willing to go ahead and do that. So the important judicial history of this entire process begins somewhere in the 1990s, when there was, I think it was the fourth pay commission or the fifth pay commission, I don't recall. But one of the pay commissions had been announced, and schools suddenly started telling parents that we need to hike fees because we have to pay salaries according to the pay commission. And the Delhi School Education Act requires schools to pay salaries according to the pay commission. Which, and from the face of it, it looks like a fair demand from schools that if we are required to pay high salaries, we are going to charge fees.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. They started hiking fees, and then some schools, as it happens in every sector, got carried away and started hiking fees to an unjustifiable extent. That's when a group of parents came together under the banner of Delhi Abhivavak Mahasangh, and they went to court and said that this is unacceptable. This is also not permitted under law, because there are under the DSEAR there are certain limitations to how much you can hike the fee. There is a clause which says you have to submit your annual fee structure to the Director of Education, who is a government officer, before the beginning of the year, financial year. So there are a lot of these small provisions in the law which were being violated, and that's why parents went to High Court. And luckily, the High Court took note of that and then gave a favorable judgment. And the High Court set up a committee called the Justice Santosh Duggal Committee. Whatever we see today, in whether it's in the High Court, whether it's in how the government regulates school fees, is because of the recommendations of the Duggal Committee.
And this was in which year?
1997 or something.
Okay. Around 2000.
But that is the ballpark, the late 90s. Now, what was the point of contention? Basically, we have to understand how school fees function. The law says that if a school accepts fees under a certain head, then its expenditure must also happen for the same purpose. For example, if I am a school and I collect tuition fee from children, tuition fee has a very specific meaning in law. Tuition fee means that the fees that the school collects to pay out staff salaries. So if I'm collecting X amount of tuition fee and I'm paying out salaries from that, but I still have some tuition fee left, then what do I do with that tuition fee, right? What does the school do with that tuition fee? Now, what Delhi schools were doing is they were purposefully collecting extra tuition fee so that there is some tuition fee left behind after paying out salaries, which they would then appropriate into their capital expenditure. So first, in the beginning of the year itself, they would escalate fees and they would show that, oh, hamara kharcha itna zyada hai, we are bearing so much expenditure. We are building a new school, we are building a new laboratory, therefore we want to charge more fees. So parents had to oblige, and then when whatever was left after the salaries were paid out or after any specific expenditure was made, the school would basically siphon off that money. Now there were some extremely rogue schools, which some of the big schools of Delhi. There have been cases where the management used that money to buy luxury cars, to buy villas, to buy land. Basically, they use the money for everything but education.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that is why in the late 90s, the Duggal Committee was formed to make some recommendation. And Duggal Committee made a very important recommendation based on the law that existed and also to clarify certain aspects of the law.
Mm-hmm.
It said that uh, it said two important things. One is that if you are collecting fees under tuition fees, then you cannot appropriate it as capital expenditure later on. And it also defined what capital expenditure is. It said that capital expenditure ka matlab hai furniture, fixture, and a third thing. But basically, you can buy desks out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy tables out of it. You can buy fixtures out of it. You know, like in the bathroom, you want fixtures, you want fans, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was that if you cannot transfer tuition fee into capital expenditure, how does the school have anything left for capital expenditure? So if I'm a school
Mm-hmm.
and I'm collecting fees, and the government is telling me I cannot even spend it on capital expenditure, I cannot spend it on anything except for settling of salaries. So how does a school function? So the committee said that you can charge 15% every year of an annual development fee.
Mm-hmm.
That development fee was to go towards capital expenditure,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
towards furnitures and fixtures. So this is the background. This is the main crux of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
So year after year, when you hear of these high court orders, when you hear of governments issuing circulars restricting fee hikes, all of that is based on that year's judgment and that year's Duggal Committee report, which was eventually, of course, affirmed in a subsequent case in 2004 in the modern school with Barakamba versus Union of India case. But this is basically the legislative and judicial part of this entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, uh, what exactly was happening is that uh, all these provisions existed, all these judicial verdicts were in existence, but because you did not have an honest government in power, private schools had a free hand to do whatever they wanted.
Yeah.
For many years, parents were complaining that schools are raising fees up to 15%, 20% every year, and the government was not doing anything about it. Which is was a fact. The government was not doing anything about it.
Yeah. And
So year after year after year,
15 years gone, three government sessions gone, right? And nothing
exactly.
happened. Okay.
Exactly, and which is why parents had to form a union. They year after year they had to go to the court, hoping that the court will issue some directions.
Mm-hmm.
So then the High Court realized what was happening, and they realized that the government, the Sheila Dikshit government, does not have any interest in regulating private schools. So the High Court set up a committee under Justice Anil Dev Singh. Uh, you can Google this committee; you will find all its recommendations and
Mm-hmm.
reports. The Justice Anil Dev Singh committee was formed to basically go into school reports, so schools' financial
Statements.
reports,
Yeah.
statements, and uh, certify whether the school was entitled to raise fees or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what was it doing? It was going through what was the expenditure,
Mm-hmm.
what is the expected expenditure. Therefore, according to that, how much should it be collecting? How much fee should it be collecting? This was the basic formula of that committee. And in subsequent years, the High Court has basically allowed this committee to issue to study schools and then give out its recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
So the news that came out last year about 449 private schools being asked to return fees was from a High Court was from a Anil Dev Singh committee report from a few years ago. It was
Mm-hmm.
not from the recent time
Okay.
after AAP has come to power.
Yeah. So
So
let's
this is
come
the
to
background.
let's come to one more. So because of this much loot from the private schools and the parents complained, they went to high court. So that was the one reason Aam Aadmi Party promised in its manifesto to regulate the tuition fee and manage the accounts online. Then in 2015 May, they also introduced a bill in the bill to regulate private school fees. So what was that bill about? Because there was a high court judgment already there?
Hmm. So that's actually a very important question. What happened is that the existing law, which was passed in 1978, sorry, 73, was quite powerful, but there was a very fundamental problem with it.
Hmm.
Uh, Whenever there was a violation of the law said that government can take two actions. The government can either one revoke the recognition of the school itself, which would mean that the school will be out of will have to stop functioning. That is one action that the school can take, that the government can take.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
other action that the government can take is that it can take over a school. So a private school that is in violation of that law, the government can unilaterally take it over, take the functioning of the school over. Now there's a fundamental problem with this because if you look at any criminal justice system of the world, wherever there are varying degrees of crimes, there is a varying degree of punishment.
Hmm.
So if a school uh, makes a violation of say 5 crores, and there is another school which makes a violation of 100 crores with siphons of 100 crores, can the punishment for both be the same? That is a question. So what happens is that uh, one there's one problem, which is that if you revoke the recognition of the school, the children suffer the most, the management does not suffer,
Yeah.
the teachers suffer because they are out of a job, and the entire community suffers because there is no school in existence anymore in that area. So that option is out of question. The second option, which is to take over a school, is also very impractical because the Delhi Education Department already runs its own government school.
Yes.
So if you have to use your limited bandwidth to run government schools and also take over private schools which are in violation, that's just not practical because with that limited staff available, you cannot do that. So that's why in 2015, as soon as we came to power, we drafted a amendment to the law uh, recommending varying degrees of punishment. Of course, there were many other things in that law. We said no management quota, capitation fees will
Yes.
be punished very severely.
Hmm.
There were a lot of such provision in that law, but this was basically the crux of that law, which would further empower the government to take strict action when required, take lenient action when required, but it would serve the purpose much better than the current law is served.
Hmm.
But that law was rejected by the President of India. At that time was Pranab Mukherjee on the advice of the Modi government. Unfortunately, the Modi government has been doing that with almost all of Delhi Assembly's bills.
Yeah.
So this is also one of them. Uh, so yeah, that answers your question.
So that law which was introduced has never got implemented.
No, it's not been included.
Okay. So then in February 2017, early 2017, 634 private school of Delhi will return the 350 crore of rupees to parents. So this was also based on the judgment from the High Court. Okay.
That's right. This is also based on that.
Hmm.
Uh, Almost all these news items that you hear are basically the government just enforcing that the High Court's order is complied.
Hmm.
The only difference is that the last time, which was about a month ago, do you remember what date was it? When was the last order?
It was around May 20 or May 23.
Yeah, so around a month ago,
Uh-huh.
uh, which said about 575 schools
575 schools, yeah.
had to return excess fees. I think that order is based on the government's own machinery. Basically, what we did is we asked schools to submit their statements, and our
Hmm.
own
Hmm.
chartered accountants were empaneled to go through those statements and figure out whether the school
Yeah.
is entitled to those fees.
I think that's when the news came that the schools are fudging the accounts.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
and
what we did is we didn't want parents to keep having to go to high court. So we basically did two, three things. One, we said, why does it have to go into the courts at all? We are empowered to do it. The government is supposed to be doing this to regulate school fees. Uh, we formed a panel of chartered accountants, and we said if any school wants to hike their fees, you please send us your financial statements. We'll go through it and we'll decide whether you need to hike your fees.
Yeah.
And based on that process, some schools were allowed and most were not allowed to hike. This was in the first year of the AAP government.
Hmm.
Again, year after year, this has been happening.
Yeah.
The other thing that we did is that fee anomaly committee that you're talking about.
Hmm.
That was a retrospective kind of a step. So once the school has already announced the fee hike,
Hmm.
parents can then go and complain to this fee anomaly committee
Yeah.
and request the government to basically go into the school's records and decide if the school's fee hike is justified.
What was the notification which was issued by Aam Aadmi Party government in August 2017 last year that whole 49 private schools were proposed by government to take over? I think it's because they did not return the tuition fee. It says tuition
Yeah,
fee.
so that was again part of the same High Court judgment.
Hmm.
Like what the AAP government was saying is that if these 449 schools do not comply with the High Court's verdict, the government will have no option but to take over. We cannot exercise our option of de-recognizing your school because that is not in favor of children and teachers. So therefore, the government had merely issued a warning saying that if you don't comply with the court's order, we'll have to take over. And that's when hundreds of schools were forced to pay up, and so many lakhs of parents got their excess fees returned to them. It was
Yeah,
a big day in
that was
Delhi.
big day, and I have seen many checks shared by people like how much money they got returned, and also there was news article like school में मची fees लौटाने की होड़. I mean,
Yeah,
they rushed into return the fees, and I
yeah.
believe after that judgment to take over on 449 schools, the school, one of the union representing school, they also went to high court against this judgment. Was that true?
I don't recall if this thing happened, but private schools are routinely going against the Delhi government in the courts. So I won't be surprised if it's true for this also. But they every year, whenever the government issues its circular restricting the extent of fee hikes, uh, the schools basically come together. They're represented by big lawyers like Kapil Sibal,
Hmm.
Salman Khurshid.
Yes.
All of these big lawyers come to the rescue of the private school mafia against the interest of parents.
Yeah, and then when was the seventh pay commission introduced?
This was in the last year.
Last year. So I think
Yeah.
after the seventh pay commission, then school started increasing the tuition fee again,
Yes.
and then
Which is
again in.
why, which is why this latest news that you just spoke about, the 575 school news,
575, yeah.
which came out last month, that
Hmm.
is after the 7th pay commission was
After
introduced.
7th pay, yeah. Okay. So that this the points you explained really connects the dots which we are missing from time to time, and I think this was really informative for us to know the Delhi education reforms and how Delhi government is fighting these private schools, and I think it got multiple battles to fight Delhi government. Everywhere there is a
Yeah,
battle.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the problem is that the the system of governance has been so compromised that whichever department you go into, there is some kind of setting between the government and some kind of private vested interest that is basically teaming up against the people. And that's why it's such a challenge for a party like ours to run a government because every step along the way is riddled with these vested interests trying to take you down. So when you see an Arvind Kejriwal trying to battle it out in politics, you also have to realize that the same man is dealing with so many challenges on the governance front at the same time as he's doing his politics. So it's really difficult being Arvind Kejriwal, but I'm so happy that he's leading us from the front, and that's what is allowing such a miracle in Delhi to happen. Uh,
Yeah.
that the government is actually fighting in favor of the parents for a change.
Yeah. So all the details we talked here in this video are all voluntary. They are not a party statement. We both are volunteers and we work in different projects for Aam Aadmi Party. And you mentioned you also work with Akshay Marathe. So can you explain a little bit how she was working and more about Atisi Marlena. We know her from media and other platforms, but we don't know about her from someone who worked with her.
Yeah. So, as the recent Dharna has already told us, the bureaucracy of Delhi is not exactly very amenable to work with. They are not very cooperative to work with us. Of course, there are exceptions. There are several officers who work extremely well and are also punished by the center for that. But there are many a time whenever you need a policy intervention to be pushed through the machinery. You want the bureaucracy to basically allow something to move forward. You need someone like an Atishi who is a politician as well as a public policy expert
Hmm.
to basically push through the government's agenda, the party's agenda through the government. And while we know of her as someone who was taking a 1 rupee salary, who was working almost for free, she's an Oxford graduate, all of these things are true. But the most important thing about Atishi is that she is not merely a public policy professional, she's also a politician. What that means is that she understands what people want. She's grounded. She understands what are the demands of the people, what are the needs of the people. So she's able to combine her experience in policy making
Hmm.
as an academic, as a researcher, as well as her very keen political instincts. And that's what made her so successful. That's what actually uh, made her such a big threat to the Modi government.
Thank you, Akshay. It was really refreshing to talk to you and know all the inside details about the Delhi education reforms and the refund of the execution fee. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope I answered all your questions.